I thought I could take a pill. It was either going to make me be physically a girl, or I thought the pill might fix me so I wouldn't feel like a girl. One way or the other, I wanted the pill to fix me. So that was like 12 years old. When you grow up with that, it has the potential to really mess you up.
I've been talking to people about what I'm doing and everything, and one woman who's in her 40s and has not exactly had an easy life, but she said, why would anybody want to choose to be a woman? Being a woman is really difficult. All the crap that we put up with and all that. Why would somebody choose to be a woman?
No one chooses it, I don't believe. But from my perspective, I didn't choose to be born the way I was. I was born female in my head, and I didn't choose that. So you can only play the part for so long, and you wear out. And I was worn out at that point.
What do you really know about people who were born transgender? Have you ever met someone who's transgender? Well, if you're like me, you're curious but hesitant to ask questions. Well, welcome to Demystifying the Transgender Journey. In our conversations with people who were born transgender, their families, friends, and the professionals who support them, we ask probing questions and discover insightful and educational answers. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. Now let's get right into today's episode. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. I'm your host, Lynn Murphy. I am the founder of Women Who Push the Limits. I am also the author of the best-selling book, 50 Life Lessons from Inspiring Women. And I am just thrilled today to be talking to Bobbie Scopa. Let me tell you a little about her before I bring her on the microphone. But she is now in her late 60s, and she transitioned when she was in her 40s. But she's had a career for 44 years as a firefighter and doing major things, firefighting wildfires, worked for the Forest Service. She spent some time after the towers fell in 9/11, helping there, hurricanes. She's got an amazing career. She's got a master's degree in forestry. She's done so much in her career, both before and after she transitioned. And today I'm going to talk to her about what that all was like. I think there's so much misinformation and misconceptions about what it's like to be trans or to transition. And it's important to tell stories of real people who have gone through all these things and create a little empathy. For all you open-minded people out there who are curious, I introduce to you Bobbie Scopa. Bobbie, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm so happy to be here with you.
And I will tell them later about your book, but I do have the book that you wrote here, which is Both Sides of the Fire Line, and it's a memoir of a transgender firefighter. And we'll put the contact information later in the podcast. But so, Bobbie, let's start at the beginning. You knew from the time you were young that you were trans. So tell us what that was like.
I knew from the earliest time, like maybe, 4 years old, when you start figuring out there's girls and boys. And I knew early on. I can remember saying my prayers for God to fix me when I had to have been 5, maybe 6 years old by that time, when I was learning to say prayers before you go to bed. And then as a 11, 12-year-old, thinking I was a part of some science experiment. At that point, I'd been living with this at that point, cognitively for 10 years or so, or 8 years. And I thought at some point, my parents are going to come and say, hey, congratulations, you've done a good job. Now here's the pill to fix you. And I thought I could take a pill, and it was either going to make me be physically a girl, or I thought the pill might fix me so I wouldn't feel like a girl. One way or the other, I wanted the pill to fix me. That was like 12 years old. When you grow up with that, it has the potential to really mess you up.
Did you feel like this was a secret you had to keep? It's because some people have said it seems like a secret. You're framing it that You thought this was a science experiment. So
Right,
how,
right.
how would that play out mentally and emotionally?
I didn't share with people because I had two older brothers who would have pummeled me if I had said something to them. I knew that my mom didn't want to talk about it because I had hinted around a little bit when I was little. And at some point she made me quit wearing nail polish because I was little. I wanted my nails polished. And she wouldn't. I think by the time I was going to start kindergarten, that had to end. And it was very clear. So I knew that there wasn't supposed to talk about that with her. My sister, who was 9 years older than me, I spoke with her a little bit about it. Um, yeah, it's a secret for sure because it's just, especially back in those days. I was born in 55. That's not something that got talked about because no one knew what it was in those days. In my circle, in my family, no one knew what that meant to think you were born in the wrong body.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So when did you finally come out to your parents? Were they still alive when you decided to transition, or?
Yes. When I was about 40, I was married, had two children, and we were having marital problems. And when my wife wanted a divorce, I had to tell my parents we were getting divorced. Now, I would be the first person, and I'm trying to think if it was how big of a group. First person to get a divorce in my family. That's including the uncles and all the cousins. So that was a huge thing to my Italian immigrant parents, Catholic. It was a huge thing to them. And so I had to tell them why. I didn't have to tell my mom. My mom knew why. Without ever me saying, she said, when I told her we're getting divorced, she said, it's because you have to be a man, isn't it?
Oh, so
So,
but she hadn't talked to you about this in all those years.
one time she told me we watched some program on TV. This is back when I was in high school or college, and we were watching some TV program. There was a transgender, back then they called them transsexual lady, and they were interviewing her. And we watched the whole program. And I got up and I was about to say something to my mom. And she looked at me and she pointed her finger and she said, "Don't get any ideas."
Oh,
And I just said, I didn't say anything. I just got up and walked away.
so she knew all that time and never
Yeah.
anything. I want to talk about your process, but when you did transition, was she helpful? Was she instructive?
No, I got kicked out of the family because of the reason we were getting a divorce.
Oh,
And so when she found out that I was getting divorced because of being transgender, that was it. Her answer was, just cut your hair and everything will be okay.
just play the part.
Yeah, yeah. And so you can only play the part for so long and you wear out.
Mhm.
And I was worn out at that point.
So talk about what it was like to live a life for 40 some years in a body that you knew wasn't really supposed to be your body and trying to play that part.
It's like being on stage. You're playing a part and you're trying to emulate. For me, I was trying to emulate guys that I knew who I respected. And if they acted a certain way, I would try to act that way. And I've never been an actor on stage, but I assume it's like playing a part. And I thought I was mistaken in this, but at the time, I thought I was doing a good job. I thought I was acting pretty convincing. And I found out after I transitioned, and guys that I knew would say, "Yeah, we figure something was like going on with you." And
Did they think you were gay, or did they think you were?
I don't know if people even knew the term trans back in those days, but I think some of them thought I was gay. I don't know exactly what they thought, but I knew that as a matter of fact, when I was a firefighter, I had some guys say to me, like make some terrible uh, comments to me, But one time, one of the guys said, "You know what people think and say about you?" And I said, "No, I don't want to know. Don't tell me. What good is that going to do? No, just keep your mouth shut." All right.
But to have to embody that role 24/7, it's not like you're on stage where you're an actor and you leave and you take it all off and then you can go back to being who
Right.
you really are. To have to carry that 24/7, what was that like emotionally?
It's exhausting. It's exhausting. You can't keep it up forever because that's why people kill themselves. That's why people drive off a cliff or end it, which I was near that point. I was near that point. I think the reason my wife divorced me wasn't so much that I was trans, because she knew I was trans since before we got married, but I think she got tired of the depression that I would sink into. I think that was driving her crazy. And then the depression, it was obvious why I was depressed. Um, and so I think that you're trying to hold it together. You're trying to play the part. And I wasn't playing the part great, which is really frustrating because you put so much energy into this facade and you think you're doing good. And you find out maybe I wasn't doing so good after all. And I put all that time and effort into it. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you deal with the depression?
I slept a lot. When it got really bad, that was my escape, was sleeping. I think when I was still working at a fire department, I think my way of coping with it was to try to ignore the depression and immerse myself in things that were macho. So on the fire department, I took the training and I became a part of the hazardous materials team. And I took the training and became part of the special rescue unit. And I was already a wildland firefighter, and I was involved in some high-risk activities there. I think you mask it, which I think it's probably very typical for transgender people to become firefighters and cops and things like that, to hide behind it, to hide behind your badge, so to speak. And so how I dealt with my depression, though, was I tried to be tougher than it.
Wait, so that sounds like that would take a lot of energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even just the job itself, whether you were trans or not, the job itself was challenging and you put yourself in harm's way a lot of times. Then to be putting on that role, not even doing it from an authentic place of feeling macho, you were trying to pretend like you were, it sounds like.
Yeah. And at the same time, I loved my job. I loved my job. And so I got into it for a reason. It was a good cover story. I use in the book. I was like undercover. I was deep undercover. And being a firefighter helped with that. And I grew to love it the very first summer I was a wildland firefighter. The very first big fire. I just was totally enraptured with this activity. So, yeah, I got into it trying to hide, but it really became a big part of my life that I really enjoyed.
And you went back to it after you transitioned to living as a woman, didn't you?
Yeah, it was at the time that I transitioned or got divorced, I owned a flower shop. I got my master's degree. I was doing some consulting work. And during the summertime, I was coming back out west to fight fires because I could get hired back as a fire leader on a temporary basis. But I had a flower shop for a few years, and that was great fun, but I was making no money. And by that time then, my wife divorced me. I needed to pay child support. I had to pay college tuition. I needed insurance. And I thought, as much as I loved having the flower shop, it's like, I just need to go back to being a firefighter. And so I sold the shop and I headed back out west with my resume. And because I had been continuing to fight fires during the summer, I had contacts. And so I got back into firefighting full time.
And the people that you had contacts with, had they known you when you were in a man's body? Did they know you had transitioned?
Yeah.
What was that kind of transition
Well,
in the world?
it's really interesting to me that during that time that I was coming out, so I had quit my job at the fire department. We moved back east for my wife's job. I went to grad school, and then I was coming out west to fight fires. I was in this in-between stage. I really hadn't transitioned yet, but I let my hair grow out a little bit. And once I let my hair grow out, I was mistaken for a woman pretty often. And so when I was on these fires, people didn't know me because I was just they call it a casual hire. I wasn't coming up with an agency. And I would show up in some state that I hadn't been before. And a lot of these people they figured something was up. That's what I understand now, is that maybe they didn't think I was female, but they thought something was up with me. But I had great experiences. I didn't have any problems because sometimes guys can be jerks. And I didn't have any more problems than anyone else. But when it was time to look for a job, and I was like, okay, I'm going to sell the flower shop and I got to go back to being a firefighter full time. I went back to a guy who I had worked for on a large fire in Oregon. And he had told me if I'm ever looking for a job to look him up. So it was like a year or two later, and I called him up and I said, hey, remember me? And blah, blah, blah. And he's, yeah. I said, can I come and visit you? Sure. So I had been up, I was working, or I was like in the Northwest. So I go to visit him and I said, hey, by the way, there's some changes in my life. And so now when he sees me, I'm not ambiguous. My gender isn't ambiguous. It's clear that I'm female. And this was before I had surgery. But surgery is like the last little bit that you got to do to clean things up. But I said, hey, I appreciate you being open and letting me talk to you. Anyway, he's responsible for me getting my first job up there. And he was a small town, a rednecky guy, but he respected my work and my abilities, and he gave me great recommendations. And because of him, I got my first job up in the Northwest. And interestingly, as my career went on and I went to California and I went to Idaho and I came back to the Northwest, he ended up working within my organization. And so I had promoted on past him, but he was responsible. And so that's the kind of thing that I concentrate on. Not the idiots who gave me a hard time, not the bullies, but I think about this guy who was so supportive and helpful to me. Yeah, that's one person's approach, one person's impact on me.
And that goes to my belief that we've got to tell stories because he knew you. And what you just said is he respected your work. He knew what kind of worker you were, what kind of firefighter you were, what kind of leader you were.
Mm-hmm.
His redneckedness, as you call it that, his whatever that redneck stuff is, that he could set that aside because he knew you personally.
Yeah.
If somebody had said to him, come, here's a transgender woman we want you to hire, he might not have had the same approach, been as open-minded. Do you think?
I agree with you. I do. And I think that, and that's the reason I wrote my book, to get a story out there. And if people hear stories and see someone, and in my case, they'll say, oh, Bobbie had a successful career, and I use air quotes, was normal. And my friends wouldn't agree with my being normal just from a standpoint of other things, nothing to do with being transgender. I think they can then go and say, if she had this life, then maybe it's not all about the Hollywood trans people we read about. This is just a regular person doing a job. And so that's the reason I tell the stories. That's the reason I wrote the book.
And that's a great book. You got great stories in there. And what came to mind, I don't know if it was in the book or if I read it in one of your articles about the loggers you were working with.
That's in the book, I think. And it's definitely, I use it in when I speak to leadership talks. to firefighters. I think the logger story is, I love it. I think it's a
Well,
great
because that's when you were working as a woman. They knew you as a woman. They hadn't known you before.
right.
So you might want to tell that story, but also I want to know for our listeners, what was the difference in how you were accepted as in your book, you say an effeminate man, that people looked at you, like you said, they thought there was something different about you and maybe they thought you were gay or something. How was your career and the way people interacted with you different when you were this man that people weren't too sure about as opposed to when you were a woman and they didn't know that you had transitioned?
There is no comparison. My career, it blossomed after I transitioned. My career took off. And I had coworkers say to me, you're only getting this promotion because you're a woman and it's affirmative action. And I would say to them, how about we compare our resumes and you tell me, show me your resume and I'll show you mine. And then you tell me I got this job because of affirmative action. But firefighters, and I think guys in general, but firefighters, more blue collar, they would rather work for a strong, competent female leader than they would for a guy that they perceive as not masculine enough. And I think to me, it was crystal clear that was the case. And I guess I don't even begrudge them that. To me, it explains the situation. And having lived for 40 years as a guy and lived in the locker rooms at the fire station and heard the conversations, maybe I don't agree with that thinking, but I understand it. But yes, my career was much, much more successful once I transitioned. I was a captain before it transitioned, but I made it to division chief, deputy chief. I was a deputy director at the regional level for the Forest Service. So yeah, my career did much better after I transitioned.
And in your book, you even talked about the difference post 9/11 when you were working in New York with all the trauma and the things that went on. You talked about how the men would be willing to talk to you about some of these things.
Yeah.
Important that was.
It was really interesting. I was talking to my coworkers who were all guys on the team that I went with from the Northwest to New York. And in the operations section on a fire or any big incident are the firefighters or the cops doing the work, as opposed to the planning people or the logistics people. And so all of the ops people back then were males on this team. And so I asked them, are the firefighters and cops talking to you about what they experienced the day that the towers came down? And they all said, no, they haven't really talked much about it. What I experienced was when it got dark, when I was working night shift or when the shift went into the dark, into the night, and I would be walking around the pile or outside the pile there at ground zero, if I stopped and paused for a little bit to just look at the scene, invariably a cop or a firefighter would sidle up to me and just start talking. They'd say, were you here that day? And I said, no, I didn't get here. A few days later. Oh, man. And they would start telling me their story about what happened to them. It was horrific. It's hard for me to think about those stories without tearing up. But they felt comfortable to talk to me. And they wouldn't talk to me like if I was out in the middle of the street. But if I was leaning up against a building in the shadows, because the spotlights at night were on the pile. And if I was leaning up against a building in the shadows, that's when they would come up to me and start talking to me. And on one hand, I felt honored that they felt comfortable to talk to me. And I think they felt comfortable talking to me because I was a woman and they wouldn't talk to the guys. And at the same time, you can get post-traumatic stress secondhand. And I got a little post-traumatic stress. There was enough going on at the scene to give you a little post-traumatic stress. But I got more just from listening to some of the stories that the guys would tell me.
Did they just need someone to listen to it to get it off their chest, or were they looking for a woman's advice?
They were just needed to vent. They just needed to tell someone. They just needed to tell someone what they witnessed, which is interesting because when I went through my near-fatal, experience on a large wildland fire, back then we didn't really know much about treating post-traumatic stress. And no one said, hey, you need to go talk to this psychologist or this therapist. And I probably could have and should have been able to talk to someone. And that's what these guys were doing. They just needed to say the words, because saying the words makes it real. Otherwise, it's in your head and you can't get it out sometimes. And I think it was important for them to speak and just tell someone. And I assume later on they got some professional assistance, because I just sat there and nodded and put an arm around them, because they would be crying. They would be sobbing over what they experienced and watching their friends die. It was horrible.
And probably not willing to cry in front of another man, and these macho firefighters and the things that they were doing, just horrendous things they were doing. But I'm sure it was all pent up, and that you were a safe haven to talk to.
Yeah. I think a safe person to talk to is the essence of it. And they felt they could talk to a woman. Like you said, they didn't want to talk to a guy and start crying in front of another guy.
When you were, something's wrong with this guy, before you had transitioned to living as a woman, they treated you differently then, didn't they?
Oh, by all means. Yeah.
Were you not one of the guys?
I was not one of the guys. Yeah, that's a safe state. Yeah. When I was with the fire department, people made very rude statements to me, said things that you get picked on.
Yeah.
I think I don't know, it's just very interesting to think about my life as a female firefighter. There were challenges. You had to put up with knuckleheads who wanted to mansplain to you something that you had 10 times more experience at than they did. You deal with that. That's what women deal with on a job like firefighting. And I think it's much better now than it ever was before. But that's normal. That's everyday stuff. I think for me, as a guy who was dealing with firefighters who wanted to be around other male macho firefighters, I just didn't fit that bill for them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it was so much easier for them and for me when all they saw was a female firefighter who was competent and who they knew pretty quickly that I knew my job.
You talk about being in the locker room with these guys and hearing all the testosterone stuff overflowing. Relate to a job that I had where I was one of two women in the organization, and Monday morning the guys would come in and talk about their conquest. It's just a little too much. So do you think you had feminine sensibilities your whole life then, and we're not into this bragging kind of stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's part of the problem. That's part of why people might have picked on me or something, because I didn't act a certain way. But it gave me insights. Like, I think I am much more tolerant of masculine behavior that might not be really healthy masculine behavior, but I think I'm more tolerant of it because I was able to listen into the conversations that were in the bunk room, and when people are going to sleep and the lights turn off and the guys are still talking in the bunk room, and I would listen to what was being said, I developed a certain amount of affection for them, an affection in terms of understanding and empathy, and I realized that they don't have an easy job of it either. Yeah. So I felt like I developed a certain amount of understanding where some of my friends, they just roll their eyes at some of the masculine traits. And I can say, I get it, but these guys are struggling in their own. They're trying to find what it means to be a guy. And what does it mean to be masculine? What does it mean to be a good person? In my first job after I transitioned, I was a battalion chief, and I would be at a chief's meeting with a dozen other chiefs for our region. And we'd go out to lunch. And they were all nice guys. They're all very respectful. But this one guy, he was always opening the door for me when we'd go into a restaurant. I'd say, Ray, don't do that. Ah, you gotta open the door. I always open the door for women. I said, I know, but look, we're in uniform. And it just doesn't seem right for you to be opening the door for me. I should be opening the door for you just as much. I said, if we're off duty and we're not in uniform, then fine. You want to open the door for me, that's fine. But I said, this is not right. Now, this guy was the sweetest, nicest guy. He meant well by everything he was doing. And I felt bad for him because there I am scolding him for opening the door for me. The poor guy didn't know which way to turn. I said, oh, it's okay to open the door for me when we're off duty and I'm not in uniform. Now, maybe that was a little bit of my craziness, but I was so determined to be an equal to these guys. And so that little story, I think, demonstrates these poor guys, what we put them through. They don't have an easy time of it.
They don't know what to do with all this.
You don't.
And I'm thinking about a woman I've been talking to people about what I'm doing and everything. And one woman who's in her 40s and has not exactly had an easy life, but she said, why would anybody want to choose to be a woman? Being a woman is really difficult, really hard. All the crap that we put up with and all that. Why would somebody choose to be a woman? And my answer was, I'm going to ask you, but my answer was, she didn't choose this. This is how she was born. But what are your thoughts about that kind of a statement?
It's exactly right. You're exactly right. No one chooses it. I don't believe. I suppose people can have different opinions and probably do have different opinions on it. But from my perspective, I didn't choose to be born the way I was. I was born female in my head, and I didn't choose that. And I had a family member tell me, because I had been, I don't know if the right word is sexually assaulted, guys grabbing you, trying to kiss you, putting their hands between your legs. I've had that happen to me multiple times. And this family member said to me, you knew what you were getting into when you chose the transition. And I'm like, wow, that is so far from intelligent. How do you respond to that? I just said I didn't choose it.
But to think that you decided it was okay to be a woman because you were going to be assaulted, there's some faulty thinking there that it's okay to assault women or that all women are assaulted or that's what's always going to happen. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. What a comment. But that's like the woman I talked to. And she gets talking about bathroom. If a man walked into the bathroom, I'd be freaked out because I've been raped, she said. And I'm thinking, I don't see that it's an issue. I don't see that stuff going on. And it seems to me that the occasional man who rapes somebody in a bathroom is not truly transgender.
No, of course not. Of course not. There's a bathroom story that, looking back on, it's comical, but it wasn't at the time. I was driving across country, and this was before I transitioned. And I was driving a pickup truck because I mostly have only pickup trucks in my life. And so I'm driving a pickup truck. I think I was in Oklahoma. I pull into a gas station to get gas and use the bathroom. And I walked into the men's room, because this is prior to transition. I walk into the men's room and this guy says, ma'am, you're in the wrong bathroom. You're in the wrong bathroom. And he was like freaking out. And I was like, oh, sorry. I didn't know what to say. And I turned around and walked out because I didn't want to say, I am a man, damn it, because that would have been embarrassing. And I didn't know what to do. I just turned around and left. And I got back in my truck and started driving. And then I was crying because I didn't know what to do. I got to go pee.
And you didn't go in the women's room?
I ended up going into the women's room, the next truck stop.
Did you?
Yeah. Because I realized, I looked at myself in the mirror and I'm like, I guess I look enough female. I'll just use the women's room.
And it's not like you're standing there at a urinal in the women's room. We close the doors. I don't usually sit there with a door to the stall. I don't know why people get so upset about it.
Yeah, that's just, the whole bathroom thing is weird because there's states, even though my birth certificate says female on it now, there's states that it would be illegal for me to use the women's room. At this point in my life, their laws say that you've got to use the restroom of the gender that you were born. Wow.
Do they have somebody standing at the door checking your credentials, telling you to drop trowel and look between your legs? I mean,
I had this backwards desire to go to one of those states and go into the men's rooms and say, suck it up, guys, because this is your law, not mine.
that is a funny picture.
Yeah. Yeah. This is what you wanted.
It makes no sense. It just makes no sense to me at all.
Yeah.
But that's the way it is. So what created the situation where you'd had enough and you decided that it was time to transition? What pushed that limit for you?
Sure. The final thing was, I was married for 20 years. The last 5 years were a struggle. It was a struggle for me personally, more and more. It was getting more difficult to keep this robe on me that covered up who I was. And as time went on, my now ex-wife she was pretty tired of dealing with me, dealing with being trans. And I was depressed a lot. I looked more and more feminine. And so when she divorced me, when she'd had enough and she divorced me, I think the divorce was final like in December. And then I'm still trying to hold it together after the divorce, and I don't get to see the kids, and I'm emotionally completely wrung out. And I think by August, so 6-8 months later, I was in therapy for depression and because of what I'd been going through with the family. And I told my therapist, I said, I don't know why I'm holding on to being a male. I don't know why I'm still trying to stay male, because my kids don't see me, my mom and dad, they don't see me. So I don't know what I'm doing. I think I might as well just transition. And my therapist said, I had been waiting to see how long it was going to take you to get to this decision. And that was in August. And back then you needed letters from 2 different mental health professionals. So I went and found another one and did all that. And anyway, by, I guess, January, so exactly 1 year after the divorce, I had surgery. I was very fortunate. It all happened really quick.
So you had surgery quite quickly. Did you do hormones before that?
Yeah, for a short while I did hormones. I have some medical anomalies to my life in addition to everything else. So I took estrogen for a little while and stopped, and then my estrogen elevated and wouldn't go down after I stopped taking hormones. And so there's all sorts of, no one has ever told me why I have this. And to this day, I haven't taken hormones in ages, and my estrogen still cycles, but it cycles like on 6-month time periods. I sampled or dabbled with the hormones. Living as a woman, that is a weird, for me, it's a hard concept. When did I start living as a woman? People were thinking I was a woman long before I ever officially transitioned. And that's why I was able to have surgery so quick. The mental health professionals, they were just like, yeah, you've already been what they used to call the real life test. You were already living, so you don't have to wait a year. And so it just all happened relatively organically. So here's a situation I was thinking about yesterday, that one of the things I'm so thankful for in my life. After the divorce, I decided, okay, I'm going to transition. So it was like I said, I told my therapist in August that I was going to go ahead and pursue having surgery. And so I got to change my name. I'm going to get my name changed officially. And so I go to where you get your driver's license, and I had the court document that said my name, my legal name. So I take it to the DMV office, or whatever they call it, and they come back, and I can, first off, they're in behind in the office, and they're looking at me, pointing and whispering, and they're gone a long time. And so she comes back after about 15 minutes of me waiting at the little desk. And she said, okay, we're going to fix your driver's license. It'll take us a few minutes. We'll be back. So when they gave me back my driver's license, not only did they change my name, they changed the gender on my driver's license. I never had to go through anything with a letter from the doctor or anything to show that your gender has changed. They saw my name change and they said, this must be, I don't know what they thought, but they changed the gender on my driver's license.
Wow.
I had it in so many ways. I might have lost my family in this whole process, but I had it so much easier than a lot of people. People struggle and fight trying to get their gender fixed on their driver's license, and I didn't even ask them to do that, and they did.
Yeah, the fact of your appearance, that helped. Some of them who were quite a bit taller or different facial features, that type of thing, that would be more of a change.
Which is interesting because I don't know if everyone feels this way, but I never thought I would look female. Even though people were mistaking me for female, I just was like, oh no, never gonna happen. Woe is me. What am I gonna do? I just didn't appreciate that people were already seeing a female.
So other than growing your hair out and maybe wearing some makeup, did you do anything?
I had a little electrolysis on my face because I had some whiskers, but that wasn't very much. And no, so I didn't have to do anything else.
So it almost seems to me like you had the female look to begin with, except you had a penis.
Yes, but I look at pictures. I've just recently moved, so I'm going through all these boxes and stuff, and I'm looking at pictures of me when I was back at the fire department. And a part of me looks at those pictures and say, wow, I was pretty good looking for a guy. I didn't think I looked, I don't think it was my looks exactly. Must be more to it that people were picking up on. Yeah, I don't know. That's all very interesting because here I am, I'm almost 70, overweight. I feel like an old lady, not feeling particularly attractive. But I don't care about that. As long as I live my life as a woman, I can't imagine trying. I don't know. It's been a long time ago. My son was getting married and my mom, who was the matriarch of the family, I asked my son, I said, can I come to the wedding? Because they were having a ceremony in the town where my parents were living, not where he was living. It was going to be a little ceremony. And they said, can I come to the wedding? Because no one's going to be there that your mom knows. No one's going to be there. Really, it's just my mom and dad's friends. Because I was not allowed to go to the graduations, to birthdays, to any of the weddings. So my son's getting married now. So can I come? I'll ask Nani. They called my mom Nani. He calls me back. Nani says you can come, but you've got to come dressed up as a man. And I thought, oh my God. I said, I didn't hesitate. I said, okay, if that's what it takes to be at your wedding, I'll come dressed up as a guy. Now, it was the most humiliating experience of my entire life because I go to this thing, I wear a pair of black slacks and a button-down shirt, and I think I have a tie on. And no one thought I was a guy. It was humiliating. It was so humiliating to be told I had to do this, but I did it because I wanted to be at least one of my kids' weddings. And after it was over and I was flying home, I think I was living in Boise at the time, flying back, and I said to myself, I will never, ever allow myself to be humiliated that way again, ever. It was horrible. What an experience. Because I went to my mom's house, and it turns out my mom was in the hospital, couldn't make the wedding. And I go to my mom's house, which I hadn't been there because I'd been ostracized for all these years. And there I am dressed up as the guy, air quotes, I'm dressed up as a guy. And there was one of my mom's friends who I had never met, and she was in the kitchen. They were preparing a meal to lay out for people who were coming to the house. And I joined in to start helping. We'd get the food out. And I said, oh, no, this platter is over here. And I know where the things are kept in the kitchen from 8 years before. I knew where everything still was. And this lady says, oh, now who are you in the family? I said, my mom and dad. I said, Frank and Mary, those are my parents. And this woman looks at me. She goes, we knew you had a sister who passed away, but we didn't know they had another daughter. And this was me dressed up as the guide.
But you weren't fooling anybody.
No. And there was multiple things got said by people who didn't know me. Oh, don't you look just like Aunt so-and-so? Yeah, sure, I'm wearing a shirt and tie, and I look like Aunt so-and-so. It was humiliating. It was the worst thing.
But you did it because that's what your kid asked you to do.
Yeah.
Wow.
If he can ask again, it's not going to happen.
Do you have a relationship with your children now?
I have a relationship with my son, and I speak to him about once a month, and I get along great with his kids and his wife, and not much of one with my daughter. I see them once every year or two. I don't have any control over that. That's what I've had to come to that conclusion, that I don't control what they think or what they want. If they wanted to have a relationship with me, or in my son's case, if he wanted to have a closer relationship with me, we could. But
you and I talked before we started this interview about, I think you made a comment that if you'd had the opportunity to transition when you were a teen or in your 20s, that you would have done that. And so let's talk about what the difference would have been if you'd transitioned then versus after you had the family and you have all this drama and then people are disowning you, not divorce plus the transition. Talk about that.
Stab me in the heart, why don't you? That is the conundrum of the ages. If I had the magic wand and could wave it and go back in time, on one hand, I'd say I would do it in a second. I would do it in a second so I could have had a more normal childhood, a more normal adolescence, a more normal adulthood. On the other hand, having been born in the 50s, there was no chance had I even been able to transition in this early 70s. There was no foundational framework for people to understand that. At least in my circle of family and acquaintances, there was no opportunity to even consider such a thing. If I could have waved the magic wand, then my children wouldn't have been born. My children are intelligent, accomplished people, wonderful parents. And even though they may or may not want to have anything or much to do with me, they're still good people and they're wonderful parents. And so I think, how could I ever say I would have made a choice not to have children, those two children in particular? If I was going to fantasize, which I used to as a kid, I fantasized a lot about it. The magic wand, whatever it would be to fix me. Absolutely, I would have loved to have been able to have a more normal adolescence, more normal young adulthood. Yeah, it's so tough. And
yeah,
I feel every time I see something about young kids who know in their heart who they are as a child, it breaks my heart and I cry for them because they're having to go through this, especially if they don't have parents who are open to the possibility that their kid is transgender. It breaks my heart to see kids going through that because I can think about myself going through it.
Yeah. You knew what happened with you and the trauma, and
yeah,
as an adult, not being able to see your children, your parents, that trauma.
Yeah.
Very traumatic.
And it's unnecessary. When I was writing my book, it made me think a lot about life and family and all that sort of thing. And actually, in my career, I've witnessed so many terrible accidents and people dying. But when I came back from New York City after 9/11, after there for a month, I wanted to grab everyone in my family and shake them by the shoulders and say, stop this. we don't know when our last day is. We've got to love each other. We've got to care about each other. We need to be there for each other. When people are so caught up in their pain, I couldn't break through the pain. I didn't know the words to say. I didn't know what to do. But it occurred to me how important family is. And I don't know, I feel so sad for my family who don't have, maybe I'm an egotist, but they don't have me in their lives. And I know I could be good for them. I know I bring a lot to my friendships with my friends and other family who I'm close to. So it breaks my heart that we're unable to get past that. Because in the end, that's what it should be all about. It should be loving our families and loving our close friends. And I have my family now. I do have some cousins that I'm close to, but my family are my friends that I've had for 50 some years that are still close in my life. And I'm living where I live because this is where we all grew up and this is where we all are. And I'm here because of them.
For people to be so close-minded, or as you're saying, in pain, to not be open to somebody else's experience and accept people for who they are.
Fear drives so much negativity. So I say it's pain, and it's pain caused by the fear of like in my case of my ex-wife, fear of what other people would think about her because of who she was married to for 20 years. Fear by my parents, worried about what other people were going to think about them because of maybe what they did or didn't do in my childhood or whatever. Fear of my brother's fear of how did this reflect on them? It's all about fear. And then that fear causes you to push someone away, and then you push them away, and now it's causing you pain. It starts with the fear, but the pain is the result.
And I know, Bobbie, you talked about growing up in an Italian Catholic family. And I know from your book, you've talked about how your faith is still strong.
Right.
You've not spent time recently in the Catholic Church, I don't think. At least that's what I took away from your book. But talk to us about your faith and how that has helped or hindered. Because I think, and you haven't mentioned this about your family, but is there something in your family about the Catholic beliefs and whatever that they're afraid to open up to you for whatever reason? I don't know. Talk about that faith piece.
The faith I've had since I was little, I felt the Holy Spirit in my life early on. And I was an avid backpacker and camper and all that sort of thing. And I felt the Spirit in the outdoors. And my spirituality is, I'm Christian, but I'm still tied to the natural environment, because if I believe that God created the world, the universe, when I see the beauty of nature, I feel like I'm seeing the hand of God at work creating this for us. And so that's my beliefs. And it was reinforced. I met an Indian man who was Catholic, but was very traditional in his Native American culture. And I asked him, how did he balance his Native American beliefs with the Catholicism that he professed? And he looked at me like I was an idiot. He had a kind look, but he looked at me like, oh, you poor dumb kid. And he started describing all the similarities between Christianity and Native American beliefs. Talked about the Holy Spirit, yes, and the Great Spirit. And where did Jesus go to pray and to get close to God? I said, what do you mean? Where did Jesus go? I'm like, you mean going out in the desert? He said, yeah. And I was like, oh, yeah, I've been going out to the desert since I was 10 years old. And then where did Moses go to get the 10 Commandments? Oh, up in the mountain. Oh, I go in the mountains all the time. So I hear all this and I'm thinking, oh my God, what a revelation. So then I go back and I go talk to my priest. And I tell my priest this conversation. And he gives me the same look as that Indian gentleman, like, oh, you poor dumb kid. Of course, it's the same God. And so, even though I was raised in Christianity and Catholicism, I really couldn't see the universality of my belief system when it comes, because I look at the natural environment and I see God's creation. And anyway, that's been my foundation. And I've had things in my life happen that were the most crazy coincidental, air quotes again, coincidental things happen to me. All these things can't just be coincidences. And I believe the hand of God has been in my life. I don't pray for the Bears to beat the Rams or whatever. I don't pray for things like that. I don't pray, I'm looking for a house. I don't pray, God, please let me get this house. This is the perfect house. I pray, say, God, I don't know what's best, but please let happen what should happen. And I guess that's my approach in how I pray. And I pray with thanksgiving a lot. I pray, try to remember to have gratitude for all my blessings. And I have got many. And it would take a whole other podcast to talk about the miracles I believe have happened in my life. But they're there. And I feel to not believe in God at this point in my life would be the most ungrateful I could be, or I could do, would be to doubt God's existence. And it's a matter of faith. There's no proving God. There's no arguing whether there is a God or not. I always crack up when you hear atheists and hardcore Christians arguing about it. How can you argue about something that's a matter of faith? It's all inside. It's all inside. And so inside me is my faith in God and my gratitude for all the gifts I've been given.
What a wonderful way to express your faith. And I didn't hear you say that you're hanging on to Catholicism or organized religion or those types of things, which I think some of that is destructive to the kind of faith that you're talking about.
I think there are lots of organized Christian churches that my belief system fits into.
Mm-hmm.
There are priests and churches in the Catholic Church that I would fit into just fine. But I find Catholicism these days has gone along with a lot of the right-wing theology. And I just believe God's a little bit more open-minded than just the Old Testament stuff.
And you talk about God creating all this beauty and relishing that beauty, but God also created you in a boy's body with a feminine intellect and mind. And my belief is that it was no mistake. There was a reason for it, for everything.
And I don't doubt that there is a reason for it. And I've thought about that long and hard. And when I was going through all this emotional trauma of losing my family, I would curse at God. And you did this to me. How dare you? How could you do this to me? If you gave me this family, then you're yanking them away. It was so hard. And yet then you mature a little bit and time goes on. And then you say, okay, there's a reason for this. And then I say, all right, what the hell were you thinking? What's the plan here? I want to know. When I'm gone, I want to know what was the plan, because I feel like that's part of our mission here is we're on a mission. We have something that we're supposed to accomplish, and I don't know what it is. But I look forward to having some understanding of that, sure.
You haven't read the end of the story yet, so you're taking it on faith, right?
That's right.
Oh, what would you say is your driving force? What has gotten you through almost 70 years of your life?
Wow. I think I have some basic foundational values. And I don't know if I could have put them if I could have verbalized them, say, when I was in my 20s. But I can see it was always there. And that is kindness. Kindness to others is one of those foundational values. And at the same time, it's been a good thing and a bad thing, but stubbornness has driven me and gotten me through a tough life. And so while I'm stubborn, I try to have some kindness and understanding. When I was younger, I never had big dreams about a career. I never was ambitious at all. I had no plans for, and when I got divorced and I'm on my own and my career was taken off, I thought this is the craziest thing in the world. I had no interest in having some big successful career. All I wanted was family. I wanted the little house with the white picket fence. That was all I ever wanted. And what I ended up getting was the career. I don't know. It's strange. It's hard for me to make sense of that, how my life, I had a successful career and I've had a great life, but it wasn't at all what I would have hoped for.
Yeah. But for a while you had that family, maybe the picket fence, but you were meant for different things, bigger.
Yeah. And there was a time after the fire where I saved some lives and I was almost killed myself, that a couple of years later, I thought, I wonder if that was it. I wonder if that was my big life's mission, was to save some lives, and these lives in particular. And I had to think about that, is because I was going through struggles with my family. I was struggling with keeping my emotions intact. And I thought, maybe that's it. Maybe I don't have to live anymore. Maybe I did what I was supposed to do. And so when I was struggling, it played into whether I was going to commit suicide or not. Because I thought, are my kids better off with a dead hero dad, or are they better off with a live trans dad? Because I thought, well, maybe my work is done. The kids are healthy. They're good kids. And maybe I already did what I was supposed to do.
And how did you decide?
That was in my cursing God phase, shaking my fist. And as I look back, I had this image of this broken bird shaking its broken wing at God, and God's holding it in its hand. And I was that broken little bird cursing God as he's holding me. For me, I think I had a feeling, I had enough feeling of self-worth that in the end, I thought my kids are better with me alive. I didn't commit suicide because I was worried about it being a mortal sin. I was more concerned about my children and how they would be affected by that. So that's what helped me make the decision. No, I'm not gonna quit. I'm gonna keep on going. And that's that stubbornness that I think helps us get through life. I was just talking about one of my granddaughters who's this stubborn little thing. And I told one of my family members, I said, that stubbornness may be what helps her be successful in life, not giving up.
I know some people talk about what courage it takes to transition, especially as an adult. You think of yourself as courageous?
No, not at all. I think of myself as choosing life over death. I didn't say, I want to be true to myself. I need to be honest in who I am, all that kind of stuff you hear. And no, it wasn't that at all. For me, it was like I hung on to the bitter end. My fingernails were scraping on the ground, being drug away as I'm trying to hold on and not transition. It would have been brave had I had this thoughtful process and said, this is who I am, and I need to have a conversation with my family, and I'm going to help them understand. No, I didn't do any of that. There's no bravery involved in this. It was because if I'm going to survive, if I'm going to be alive, I'll transition. And like I said, that imagery of me dragging my fingernails on the ground, wanting not to transition, that's how I was. And so I don't consider that a brave or courageous thing.
No.
I really feel like it was chicken shit. I wasn't honest. I didn't do it in an honest way. I did it because I had no options left.
It was survival.
It was strictly survival, yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you survived.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm sure your book has made some difference. I know you teach leadership classes and those types of things. Are you aware of difference that you're making in other women's lives or other transgender people's lives?
I hear from people, not the transgender people, but I hear from their family. Before I wrote the book, I was never involved in any of the LGBT stuff. I didn't know any trans people. I had met one trans person before I had surgery.
That's all?
That's all. I still don't, I really don't know others. Since I wrote the book, I have found out a lot of people have trans people in their family. And I have heard from the people like the moms, the dads, the uncles, the aunts, the best friends. That's who I've heard from. I haven't heard from the trans people, which is just fine with me because I am happy to know that people are reading my book and saying, I have a boss or an ex-boss. He was boss for quite a few years for me. And he read the book. He didn't know I was transgender. Someone else had told him about my book, and he thought it was just about fire stories. And they said, no, it was about her being a trans firefighter. He was like, what do you mean? So anyway, he sends me a note. He reads the book, and he said, first off, I had no idea. Thanks, you were great at your job and blah, blah, blah. But most importantly, your book is going to help me be a better father to one of my children who's questioning their gender.
Wow.
I've heard things like that from multiple people. And that's what satisfies me, because when I was going through the whole process of writing the book, and you know how that is, and then trying to find a publisher and then all that jazz, I said, if I can help one family, if one family stays together because of my book and avoids all the heartache and trauma that my family has gone through, if I can help one family avoid that, then all that time was so worth it. And so I've heard from people whose families are in better shape because of the story.
Wow. So congratulations on that. I know one of the women I interviewed before was writing her memoir, and she had a horrible life, but it was so difficult, not just the writing itself, but reliving all of that. How did you find that for you?
It's horrible. I know people said, oh, it must have been so cathartic to write the book. No, you're reliving all the trauma, all the stuff that you were able to put out of your head and move on. And that's how, I don't want to say I live in denial, but I don't dwell on all the pain and all the agony. And when you write the book, I had reviewers say, oh, it should have been longer. Oh, Jesus, I could have barely get through what I wrote.
It all comes up, doesn't it?
Yeah. All those emotions, you're sitting there crying while you're typing at the computer.
Yeah.
It was very tough to write.
Yeah. Thank you for writing it. And I'm glad you're hearing back from people who are appreciative and are grateful for what you're doing. And I'm sure you don't even know the people that you've touched. You've heard from a few, but you don't know the ones who are not writing to you and letting you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was speaking at a firefighter training conference, and I'm talking about leadership in terms of diversity in the workplace. So these were a bunch of fire chiefs. And I thought I kind of fell flat. I'm trying to break through with a tough crowd. And I got an email from a young man from, I don't know, Alabama or somewhere in the South. He's a fire chief. And he told me that was the best conference at this week-long conference. It was the best conference he'd been to, my class, my breakout of the whole session. And the point of that is you don't know where you're touching the people. You don't know where you're making improvements in lives. And so all you do is you put it out there and hope the seeds fall on fertile ground.
Yeah. Yeah. You plant those seeds and hope somebody's watering them and tending to them and that they grow into wonderful things. Bobbie, what about your whole journey surprises you?
I knew that my life would be okay after I transitioned. That would have surprised me. That would have surprised me greatly 40 some years ago or whatever, or not that long. So that surprises me looking back on it. That leads to my gratitude for how my life worked out. I don't know. Everything about my life is surprising. I never thought I was particularly smart because in my family, I was not the smart one. I was the cute, funny one. But it turns out I'm not so dumb. And I've that a little bit of intelligence and some hard work gave me a good life. And so there's lots, I could go down the list of things that I'm surprised at, that how things worked out.
Yeah, it's amazing that you're uncovering these things about yourself that you weren't so sure about when you were younger.
We grow up in families and everybody plays a role. Everybody's got their role. And in a healthy family, when you get older, you transcend all that crap and you have different relationships with your siblings. And I've got friends who have great, healthy relationships with their siblings. In our family, we never transcended that. The expectation was you're going to stay in that role. I don't have a relationship with my brothers.
Yeah, you changed roles significantly.
Yeah.
Did they change roles, or are they still the same they were when they were kids?
I think looking back with a little bit of wisdom as you look back, I think they're still playing their same role. And so maybe if they're stuck in their role, it can't let me change my role.
So you talk about smarts, but there's IQ and then there's EQ, your intelligence quotient. And sounds like I'm sure you're high on the IQ level, but also very high on the EQ level.
I don't think I am high in the IQ level, but I think I think I do have a little bit better awareness. And I think that when you start to move up in an organization, that's as important as any technical skills.
Yeah.
You
don't have to know everything about everything, but if you know how to lead people, and that's your strength too, is obviously you knew how to fight fires, but you also knew how to lead people.
Yeah.
And that's what's important to me anyway, that part of it. You can get other people to do the other stuff.
Right.
The technical stuff, but there's so many people who don't know how to lead people, and you're one who does.
One of my favorite things to do is when I get to go talk to firefighters and I'm at a station and the officers are all there and I'm talking about leadership. It's like my favorite day in the world right there. As I'm back at a fire station and I'm BSing with the firefighters and I think I'm making progress and I'm opening eyes. And because I watch their body language and I see them open their eye a little bit or shift in their seats at a certain time, and then the questions come, it makes me feel so positive and so thankful because it's not like I had a master's in leadership. I've read the books, but I've watched it and I've watched other people and I've lived it. And so that's pretty surprising too for me that I'm getting to do this.
And there's a difference between reading a book about leadership and doing it.
It is, but it's good to read lots of different perspectives because you can read a book. I read Giuliani's book on leadership and I threw it in the garbage. I didn't want any, because at work, I had a bookshelf on all leadership books. I didn't want anyone reading that book because it was such a horrible example of leadership.
Yeah.
And so I literally threw it away. And this was long before anything political happened. It was just reading the books is important, but you have to apply it. You have to have your experience to read it and say, oh, that would have been good to know when I was doing something stupid.
But you have to act on it and you have to see what works for you. Not everything that you read in a book is going to work for you. And then you get things that have worked for you that weren't in the books.
You can't just read a book and say, oh, I'm going to do it just like that.
Yeah, you've had a great career. And Bobbie, we've had a great time talking. I could talk to you all afternoon. It's wonderful. Is there something else that I haven't asked or something that you want to say as far as what's important to the trans community? What do you want to share that I haven't asked you?
I would say for the trans community, I would say if you're in the middle of transition or you're thinking about transitioning, try to keep in mind or try to have a sense of generosity towards your family and towards your friends. And I mean that in that I think we get ourselves, and I include myself in this, we get so caught up in our own pain and our own despair and our own maybe joy when you start the transition that we don't appreciate what our family and friends are going through. Because from their perspective, they truly are losing someone in their perception. And we have to have some generosity towards them and some feelings of empathy to what they're going through. And I think lots of trans people, myself included, when you're in the middle of that process of transitioning or thinking you might transition, we can be pretty egocentric. And I think we need to be concerned about those around us, because if we want their love and support and understanding, we have to be able to provide them some love and support and understanding.
Yeah. Parents aren't prepared for this. They don't get that in their baby book about how to deal with a child who's transgender.
And give people time to adjust.
Yeah.
Give people time. Yeah.
Maybe the fact that there's more conversation about it now, even though some of the conversation is cruel and misinformed, there's some conversation. So appreciate that tip. Thank you for that.
That's perspective. I don't have any rules. It's just think about this.
No, I think that's important for everybody to think about. Empathy on both sides.
Yeah.
If you love somebody, if you care about them, step out of your own perspective and see if you can figure out what the other person's feeling. Yeah.
And the other thing I would just mention, I got to put a cheap plug in for my podcast, BobbieOnFire.com, BOBIE, BobbieOnFire.com. It's a lot of firefighting stories. There's nothing gender related other than just dealing with gender in relationship to guys dealing with a female fire chief, but lots of good leadership lessons there that are totally not related to the LGBT stuff. I'm up to almost 1.7 million downloads as of May 1st here. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Congratulations. And I can see why. I've only listened to a few of them, but they're fascinating. Conversations that you have on there are really remarkable. So
great.
Not a cheap plug at all. I think that's a very important thing for people who enjoy podcasts and want to listen to these lessons. Very important. And your book too. It's important. Put in a plug for your book. Both sides of the
fire line is filled with stories. And when I was writing this, I had all these stories that were in my podcast, or a lot of them were in the podcast. And then I thought I should tell the rest of the story being my life and my gender struggles. And so I write this book. And as I talked about how difficult it was and all that, but it's an interesting process to write a book. But the point about the book is I think you can find it entertaining. I think you can find it interesting. My son, who is a good critic, says, it was a compelling story. I'll give you that. That's what someone's. It cracked me up. I thought that's pretty good. Pretty coming from him. It was a compelling story. I know someone or one person who told me they couldn't finish the book. They said it was too sad. And I said, oh my God, it's not sad. It's uplifting.
It is.
And so I felt bad because the first half of the book, I have it divided into a life lost. Then the second half is a life found. And yeah, the life lost, there's some sadness in there, but you got to keep at it because I think it's a great lesson for perseverance and to work hard and to be positive. So I hope that's what people are getting out of it. You don't have to know someone who's trans to get something from the book.
No, and there's so much about your firefighting experiences and the 9/11 experience.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about your transgender experience in the transgender community. There's so much in there that would appeal to, I think, anybody who wants a compelling book.
The fire departments are using my book for training, for leadership training. And so I'm very excited about that. Seattle Fire Department was requiring it to be read for the lieutenant's exam. Other fire departments and fire organizations are using it. So yeah, there's a lot more to the book than just some story about some transgender person.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And I can see where that would be very important. All the stories that you tell, and I'm not in that profession or anywhere near that profession, but the stories that you tell, really, you're encapsulating the leadership aspect of it, which is really remarkable. And the stories are very interesting. But you grew up in Arizona, I grew up in Arizona, so I love the desert and the fight that you're talking about, and the forests and the mountains, and
Mm-hmm.
it speaks to me too. I love that.
Yeah.
So that part of it was attractive to me. Great story. So what's the next limit that Bobbie Scopa is going to be pushing?
Oh God, I don't know. I have thought about writing another book. This one not about trans stuff. God help me. And on transitioning again in my life, I transitioned off my boat. And so I sold my boat because I was spending half the year up on the Puget Sound on my boat. Uh, so I'm going to be exploring the West now in my little trailer. So I wanted to do some other traveling. So I'm going to be traveling around with my little 17-foot travel trailer. I'll take off for a few months and see how it goes, maybe longer. Just depends how I'm faring. So that's going to be a new thing for me.
That sounds like an exciting adventure. I hope you've got enough room in there for a whole stack of books to take with you to share with people.
Yeah, I have my Johnny Appleseeds passing out the book.
You are planting seeds.
I'm planting seeds.
You never know who's going to read that book and have an aha moment and change the direction of their relationships.
No, that's true.
Bobbie, is there anything else that you want to say before I close out this wonderful conversation we've been having?
I will just say, I will just ask folks to think about dealing with, speaking with kindness, speaking with love to their family and friends and acquaintances and people they don't know. To kindness, boy, that's the lubricant, I think, that keeps our society going. And I just ask people to think about that when we're dealing with other folks who might not look like you, think like you, go to the same church you do. Kindness.
That's so important. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
So tell people how they can contact you. Is there a contact on that podcast?
Podcast. Yeah, bobbieonfire.com. And then my email address, you can contact me through bobbieonfire.com, or my email address is bobbie@bobbieonfire.com. That's the best way to I get my emails. Like everybody else, my phone is attached to my ear, and so I'm always returning emails pretty quick.
Wonderful. And I know they can get your book on Amazon, and I'm sure there's a link somewhere on that website that they can order your book.
Yeah, they can order the book through their favorite bookshop, the bookstore, the publisher, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, wherever you want to get it.
I will encourage people to buy that book because it's fascinating. I've read it. I love it. And I want to get you to sign that.
Okay, I promise I will. Okay.
All right. So let's thank everybody for joining us today on another episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. It's been amazing today to be talking to Bobbie Scopa. And I know you've enjoyed this. So subscribe, give us a review, give us that 5-star rating on this so that we can push this out so people can hear about it more. And tell your friends. We want people to hear this and other episodes. So I'm Lynn Murphy. I've been your host today. I'm the founder of Women Who Push the Limits. And wonderful opportunity to spread the word, spread the story about people we don't know. And Bobbie talks about kindness. Okay, let's spread the kindness. So here's what I want you to remember from my point of view too. Tell your story. No matter who you are, you've got a story to tell. And Bobbie, I so much appreciate you telling the story. So find your voice, speak your truth, and change the world. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of our fascinating interviews. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. So until next time, stay curious and stay kind.